When a man hurts you, most people expect you to break, to chase, to explain, or to beg for clarity. But what if the most powerful response isn't noise? It's strategy. What if instead of reacting emotionally, you respond intelligently? Today, I'm going to show you how to confuse him. Not with games, but with self-respect, silence, and strength. Because nothing unsettles a man more than a woman who refuses to play the role he expected. When a man hurts you, the first instinct most people have is to explain themselves. You want to clarify your intentions, justify your feelings, and make sure he understands how deeply he affected you. This urge comes from a place of wanting to be seen and validated. You believe that if you can just find the right words, the pain will make sense to him and he might finally acknowledge what he did wrong. But what often happens instead is that your explanations become emotional currency he can spend however he wants. The more you talk, the more he listens without truly hearing, and the more power quietly slips from your hands. Explaining yourself repeatedly after being hurt often places you in a defensive position, even when you did nothing wrong. You start answering questions that should never have been asked, justifying boundaries that should have been respected, and defending emotions that are completely valid. Over time, this dynamic can make you feel smaller, as if your feelings require permission or approval. The person who hurt you may begin to feel like the judge of your reactions rather than the cause of your pain. This reversal is subtle, but it is deeply damaging to your sense of self-worth. When you stop explaining yourself, something powerful happens internally. You begin to recognize that not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Your thoughts, emotions, and reasoning are not public property. They are personal, sacred, and valuable. By withholding explanations, you are not being cold or cruel, you are being selective. You are choosing who gets to understand you, and that choice alone shifts the balance of power. Silence in this context is not weakness, it is discernment. Many people fear that if they stop explaining, they will be misunderstood. But the truth is, someone who truly wants to understand you does not need endless explanations. They listen the first time. They observe your behavior. They respect your boundaries. When a man hurts you and then demands explanations, what he is often seeking is not understanding, but control. He wants to steer the narrative, minimize the damage, or twist your words into something that serves him. Silence disrupts that agenda. There is also an emotional exhaustion that comes with constant explaining. Each explanation forces you to relive the hurt, reopen the wound, and justify your pain all over again. You end up draining yourself emotionally while he remains detached or defensive. Over time, this imbalance can leave you feeling depleted, confused, and even guilty for feeling hurt in the first place. By stopping explanations, you conserve your emotional energy and redirect it toward healing rather than proving. Not explaining yourself does not mean suppressing your feelings. It means choosing a different outlet for them. Instead of pouring your emotions into someone who caused the pain, you process them privately or with people who are safe and supportive. You allow yourself to feel fully without needing the person who hurt you to validate that pain. This separation is crucial for emotional independence. Your healing no longer depends on his response, apology, or understanding. Silence also creates space for observation. When you stop explaining, you begin to see the situation more clearly. You notice how he reacts when you no longer chase conversations or try to fix things verbally. Some men become confused, unsettled, or suddenly more attentive. Others may reveal indifference or defensiveness. Either way, the truth surfaces without you having to say a word. His behavior becomes the answer you were desperately trying to extract through explanations. There is a misconception that communication always means talking more. In reality, communication also includes what you choose not to say. By withholding explanations, you communicate boundaries. You signal that certain lines have been crossed and that access to your emotions is no longer automatic. This kind of communication is often more impactful than long conversations because it forces the other person to sit with uncertainty instead of leaning on your words for comfort. When you explain yourself too much, you often end up negotiating your standards. You soften your expectations, rationalize unacceptable behavior, and compromise values just to keep the conversation going. Over time, this erodes your self-respect. By stopping explanations, you stop negotiating with someone who has already shown you who they are. You allow your standards to exist without debate, and that alone is a powerful act of self-respect. Another important aspect of not explaining yourself is breaking the cycle of emotional overexposure. When someone hurts you, they do not automatically earn deeper access to your vulnerability. Yet many people respond to pain by opening up even more, hoping closeness will fix the issue. This often backfires. The person who hurt you may use that vulnerability against you or take it for granted. Silence protects you from giving too much to someone who has already taken too much. Choosing not to explain also helps you reclaim your narrative. When you talk excessively, you give the other person the opportunity to reinterpret your words, challenge your feelings, or rewrite the story in a way that benefits them. Silence keeps the story intact. You know what happened. You know how it made you feel. You do not need external confirmation for your reality to be valid. This internal validation strengthens your confidence and emotional stability. There is a quiet confidence that comes with not explaining yourself. It signals that you trust your own judgment and do not need approval to stand by your feelings. This confidence is often unsettling to someone who expected emotional reactions or lengthy discussions. They may begin to question their assumptions, their behavior, and even their importance in your life. Confusion arises not because you are playing games, but because you have stepped out of a predictable role. Over time, not explaining yourself helps you detach emotionally from the hurtful situation. Detachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop allowing the situation to define you. You no longer feel compelled to fix, justify, or rescue the connection. Instead, you observe from a distance, grounded in your own sense of worth. This emotional distance creates clarity, allowing you to make decisions based on logic rather than pain. It is also important to understand that explanations often come from a fear of abandonment. You worry that if you do not explain, he will leave or misunderstand you permanently. But someone who is willing to leave because you stopped explaining was never committed to understanding you in the first place. Letting go of this fear is liberating. You realize that losing someone who requires constant justification is not a loss, it is a release. When you stop explaining yourself, you shift the focus from being understood to understanding yourself. You reflect on why the situation hurt, what boundaries were crossed, and what you need moving forward. This self-reflection is far more valuable than any external validation. It allows you to grow emotionally and become more intentional in future relationships. You are no longer reacting, you are responding with awareness. Silence also gives you time. Time to calm your emotions, time to process your thoughts, and time to decide what you truly want. Rushed explanations often come from heightened emotions and can later be regretted. By pausing and choosing silence, you give yourself the gift of clarity. You are no longer pressured to say the right thing in the moment. You can choose if and when to speak from a place of strength rather than pain. In the end, not explaining yourself after being hurt is an act of self-preservation. It is a way of saying that your peace matters more than winning an argument or being understood by someone who caused you pain. You are not shutting down. You are setting boundaries. You are not being passive. Are being intentional. And in that intention, you begin to regain control over your emotions, your energy, and your life. Changing your availability after a man hurts you is not about punishment or manipulation. It is about recalibrating access. When someone hurts you, they often assume that your time, attention, and emotional presence will remain the same. They expect you to still answer quickly, still show up when they call, still prioritize their needs despite the pain they caused. This expectation creates an imbalance where they feel secure while you carry the emotional weight. By changing your availability, you quietly disrupt this imbalance. You begin to show through behavior rather than words that access to you is not unconditional. Availability is one of the most undervalued forms of power in relationships. When you are always available, your presence becomes predictable and, unfortunately, easy to take for granted. After being hurt, maintaining the same level of availability sends the message that your boundaries are flexible and that emotional harm does not have consequences. Changing your availability reintroduces value. It reminds both you and him that your time and energy are limited resources, not guarantees. This shift alone can cause deep internal confusion because it breaks the pattern he relied on. Emotionally, changing your availability helps you detach from the immediate need for validation. When you are constantly available, you often remain emotive, only tethered, waiting for messages, explanations, or signs of remorse. This waiting keeps you stuck in the hurt. Reducing availability creates emotional space. That space allows your nervous system to calm down, your thoughts to slow, and your perspective to widen. You begin to respond rather than react, which is a crucial step in regaining emotional control. Many people fear that changing availability will appear cold or immature. In reality, it is one of the most mature responses to emotional harm. Maturity does not mean endless accessibility, it means knowing when to step back. When you are hurt, your primary responsibility is not to maintain comfort for the person who caused the pain, but to protect your own emotional well-being. Changing availability honors that responsibility without confrontation or explanation. There is also a psychological shift that occurs when you are no longer consistently present. Humans tend to value what feels uncertain or less accessible. When your availability decreases, he may begin to reflect on what changed and why. This reflection is often more powerful than any argument or explanation. Instead of you chasing accountability, he is left to sit with the absence of your presence and the discomfort it creates. That discomfort is where awareness begins. Changing your availability also interrupts unhealthy communication patterns. If conversations previously revolved around emotional labor, explanations, or conflict resolution-driven mostly, why? By you? Stepping back forces a pause. That pause reveals whether he is capable of self-reflection and effort on his own. Some men will step up, showing accountability and respect. Others will withdraw or become frustrated. Either outcome gives you clarity without you having to ask for it. From a self-respect standpoint, reduced availability reinforces your boundaries internally. Even if you never verbalize them, your actions reflect a new standard. You are no longer instantly responsive or endlessly accommodating. This behavioral shift helps retrain your own mind as well. You begin to see yourself as someone whose time matters, whose energy is valuable, and whose presence must be earned through respect and care. Changing availability is also deeply connected to breaking emotional dependency. When you are always available, you may unconsciously rely on his attention to regulate your emotions. Stepping back forces you to find stability within yourself. You begin to redirect your focus toward your own routines, goals, friendships, and interests. This redirection strengthens your independence and reduces the emotional grip the situation has on you. It is important to understand that changing availability does not mean disappearing completely or playing games. It means being intentional. You respond when it feels right, not out of obligation or fear. You show up when there is respect, not when there is confusion or pain. This intentional presence is far more powerful than constant access because it is rooted in self-awareness rather than emotional urgency. As your availability changes, you may notice resistance from him. He may question why you are distant or accuse you of changing. This reaction often stems from loss of control rather than genuine concern. When someone benefits from your constant availability, they feel destabilized when it disappears. Recognizing this helps you stay grounded and not guilt yourself into reverting to old patterns. Internally, reduced availability gives you time to evaluate the relationship more honestly. Without constant interaction, emotional fog begins to lift. You can assess whether the hurt was a momentary mistake or part of a larger pattern. This clarity is difficult to achieve when you are always emotionally present and engaged. Distance, even temporary, brings perspective. Changing your availability also teaches others how to treat you moving forward. People learn what you tolerate based on what you continue to offer. When your availability becomes conditional on respect and emotional safety, it sets a precedent. Even if this particular relationship does not improve, you carry this standard into future connections, creating healthier dynamics overall. There is also a healing component to reduced availability. Emotional wounds need space to heal. Constant interaction with the source of pain keeps the wound open. By stepping back, you give yourself room to process emotions fully rather than suppressing to maintain connection. This healing is not passive. It is an active choice to prioritize your inner peace. Changing availability can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you are used to being accommodating or emotionally present. That discomfort is often a sign of growth. You are breaking a familiar pattern and stepping into a new one that prioritizes balance. Over time, this new pattern feels less like distance and more like stability. As you continue to limit access, you may notice a shift in how you see yourself. You begin to feel less reactive, less anxious, and more centered. Your sense of worth becomes less tied to his responses and more rooted in your own values. This internal shift is subtle but transformative. It changes not only how he perceives you, but how you perceive yourself. Ultimately, Changing your availability is a quiet declaration that your presence is intentional, not automatic. It communicates self-respect without confrontation and strength without aggression. By stepping back, you allow the truth of the situation to reveal itself naturally, while protecting your emotional energy and reclaiming control over your time and attention. Controlling your emotions in front of a man who hurt you is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. Many people believe that expressing pain openly is the healthiest response. And while emotions should never be suppressed, there is a difference between processing feelings privately and displaying them to someone who caused the harm. When you lose emotional control in front of him, you unintentionally hand him insight into your triggers, your vulnerabilities, and the depth of his impact on you. Calmness, on the other hand, limits his access to that emotional information and shifts the power dynamic immediately. Emotional reactions often come from shock and betrayal rather than clarity. When you react impulsively, your words may not fully represent what you feel or need. Anger, tears, and frustration can blur your message and allow him to focus on your reaction instead of his behavior. Remaining composed keeps the attention where it belongs, on the actions that cause the hurt. It prevents the conversation, or even the silent exchange, from turning into a debate about your emotions rather than his accountability. When you maintain emotional control, you signal emotional maturity. You show that while you are affected, you are not undone. This composure can be deeply unsettling to someone who expected chaos, confrontation, or desperation. Many men anticipate emotional outbursts because those reactions reaffirm their influence. Calmness disrupts that expectation. It forces him to confront the reality that his actions did not give him the emotional leverage he assumed he had. There is also an internal benefit to emotional control that goes beyond the interaction itself. When you regulate your emotions, you protect your nervous system from staying in a heightened state of stress. Emotional explosions often leave you feeling drained, regretful, or exposed afterward. Calm responses, or even silence, help you conserve emotional energy. That energy can then be used for reflection, healing, and decision-making rather than damage control. Controlling your emotions does not mean pretending you are unaffected. It means choosing when, where, and with whom you express your feelings. Emotional expression is healthiest when it happens in safe spaces, alone, with trusted friends, or through journaling or reflection. When emotions are shared selectively, they become tools for healing instead of weapons that can be used against you. A calm demeanor after being hurt often creates cognitive dissonance for the person who caused the pain. He may struggle to reconcile his expectations with your response. Instead of seeing tears or anger, he sees restraint. This forces him to fill in the silence himself, often questioning whether he misjudged your strength or underestimated your self-worth. That internal questioning is far more impactful than any emotional confrontation. Emotional control also prevents manipulation. When someone knows exactly how to provoke a reaction from you, they hold an advantage. Showing emotional restraint removes that leverage. He no longer knows which words or actions will trigger a response. This uncertainty can feel destabilizing to someone who relied on emotional predictability to maintain control or superiority in the dynamic. Remaining calm allows you to observe rather than engage. Observation is powerful because it reveals patterns. You begin to notice whether he shows remorse, defensiveness, indifference, or confusion. These reactions offer valuable insight into his character and intentions. Emotional reactions can cloud this observation, pulling you into the moment instead of allowing you to see the bigger picture. There is a quiet authority in emotional regulation. When you do not raise your voice, cry excessively, or plead for understanding, you communicate that your emotions are not chaotic or out of control. This authority often commands more respect than emotional intensity. It sets a tone that says you are grounded, self-aware, and not dependent on his response to stabilize your feelings. Controlling your emotions also helps you avoid saying things you may later regret. Hurt can push people to lash out, exaggerate, or speak from pain rather than truth. These words can linger long after the moment has passed, complicating healing or closure. Emotional restraint gives you time to choose words carefully, or to choose silence when words are unnecessary. Another important aspect of emotional control is reclaiming dignity. Pain does not strip you of dignity, but how you respond to pain can either preserve or compromise it. Maintaining composure allows you to walk away from the situation knowing you did not abandon your values or self-respect in a moment of distress. That knowledge strengthens your confidence. Long after the interaction ends, Emotional control also shifts the internal narrative you hold about yourself. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who is overwhelmed or powerless, you begin to see yourself as capable and resilient. This self-perception matters deeply because it influences future boundaries and relationships. You learn that you can experience pain without losing control, and that realization builds emotional resilience. When you remain calm, you also reduce the likelihood of escalating conflict. Emotional reactions can turn a hurtful situation into a dramatic one, drawing it out unnecessarily. Calmness shortens the cycle. It prevents repeated arguments, emotional roller coasters, and unresolved tension from consuming your time and energy. You disengage without hostility, which is often more effective than confrontation. There is also a strategic element to emotional control. Calmness keeps your options open. You are not forced into immediate decisions or declarations driven by heightened emotions. You can take time to assess whether reconciliation, distance, or complete separation is best for you. Emotional restraint gives you flexibility and clarity, both of which are essential for making choices that align with your long-term well-being. Over time, practicing emotional control reshapes how you handle all forms of conflict, not just romantic hurt. You become less reactive and more intentional in your responses. This skill extends into friendships, family dynamics, and professional relationships. What begins as a response to being hurt becomes a lifelong emotional strength. Ultimately, controlling your emotions in front of a man who hurt you is an act of self-protection, not emotional suppression. It allows you to maintain clarity, dignity, and power while processing pain on your own terms. Calmness does not erase hurt, but it ensures that hurt does not dictate your behavior or define your worth. Focusing on your growth instead of his guilt is one of the most transformative shifts you can make after being hurt. When someone wrongs you, it is natural to want them to feel remorse, to understand the damage they caused, and to carry the weight of responsibility. You may replay conversations in your mind, imagining the moment when he finally admits fault and expresses regret. But the truth is that centering your healing around his guilt keeps you emotionally tied to him. Your progress becomes dependent on his awareness, his conscience, and his willingness to change, which are all things you cannot control. When you focus on his guilt, you give him power over your emotional state. His apology or lack of one determines how you feel, how you sleep, and how you see yourself. This creates a silent dependency where your peace is postponed until he feels bad enough. Shifting your focus to your own growth breaks this dependency. It places your healing back into your hands where it belongs. Growth does not wait for permission, and it does not require acknowledgement from the person who caused the pain. Personal growth begins with accepting that not everyone will take accountability in the way you deserve. Some people minimize, justify, or avoid responsibility altogether. Holding on to the hope that guilt will eventually change them can keep you stuck in emotional limbo. Growth, on the other hand, moves forward regardless of their awareness. It asks different questions, not about why he did what he did, but about what you learned, what you tolerated, and what you will no longer accept. When you redirect your energy toward growth, you begin to invest in yourself instead of monitoring his emotions. You stop analyzing his words, his tone, and his behavior for signs of regret. Instead, you analyze your own patterns, boundaries, and needs. This shift is subtle but powerful. Your attention moves from the outside in, allowing you to rebuild from a place of self-awareness rather than emotional reaction. Focusing on growth often reveals uncomfortable truths about yourself, but these truths are liberating. You may realize that you ignored red flags, overextended emotionally, or compromised your standards to maintain connection. These realizations are not meant to shame you, they are meant to strengthen you. Growth is not about self-blame, but about self-honesty. It allows you to refine your boundaries and expectations moving forward. There is also a quiet confidence that comes with prioritizing growth. Instead of trying to prove how much you were hurt, you begin to demonstrate resilience through change. You show, through your actions and choices, that pain did not define you or diminish you. This confidence is often more impactful than demanding accountability because it reflects internal stability rather than emotional dependence. When you stop focusing on his guilt, you also stop reopening the wound. Replaying the hurt, hoping for remorse, keeps the pain alive. Growth allows the wound to close because your attention is no longer fixed on the injury itself. You begin to build new routines, habits, and goals that reinforce your sense of identity beyond the relationship. Healing becomes an active process rather than a waiting game. Personal growth after hurt often involves reconnecting with parts of yourself that were neglected. You may rediscover passions, friendships, or ambitions that faded while you invested heavily in the relationship. This reconnection restores balance. Your life begins to feel fuller and more grounded, not because the pain disappeared, but because it no longer occupies the center of your existence. Focusing on growth also changes how you interpret the hurt. Instead of seeing it solely as a loss, you begin to see it as information. The experience teaches you about your emotional limits, your values, and your capacity for resilience. This reframing does not justify what happened, but it gives the experience purpose. Pain becomes a catalyst for evolution rather than a permanent scar. There is a sense of empowerment in realizing that your future is not shaped by his remorse, but by your response. Growth-oriented thinking asks what kind of person you want to become as a result of this experience. Do you want to become more guarded or more discerning, more fearful or more self-assured? These choices shape your emotional future far more than his guilt ever could. When you grow, you naturally shift the dynamic without confrontation. He may notice that you are more focused, less reactive, and more grounded. This change can be confusing to someone who expected you to remain emotionally invested in their actions. Your growth becomes a silent boundary, signaling that your energy is no longer available for emotional cycles that do not serve you. Growth also teaches patience with yourself. Healing is not linear, and there will be moments when anger or sadness resurfaces. Focusing on growth allows you to meet these moments with compassion rather than frustration. You understand that progress does not mean the absence of pain, but the ability to move forward despite it. This mindset fosters emotional resilience. Another aspect of growth is redefining your standards for connection. You begin to ask deeper questions about emotional safety, communication, and mutual respect. These standards are not reactions to one person's behavior, they are intentional choices for your life. By focusing on growth, you ensure that future relationships are shaped by wisdom rather than unresolved hurt. As you continue to grow, you may notice a shift in how you remember the situation. The intensity fades and clarity takes its place. You no longer feel the urge to prove your pain or seek validation for it. Your confidence comes from knowing that you honored yourself by choosing growth over fixation. This internal validation is far more stable than any external acknowledgement. Growth also strengthens your sense of identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who can endure disappointment without losing direction. This self-image becomes a foundation for future challenges. Each step forward reinforces the belief that you are capable of navigating emotional pain with grace and intention. Ultimately, focusing on your growth instead of his guilt allows you to reclaim ownership of your life. Your healing becomes self-directed. Your confidence becomes self-sustained, and your future becomes self-defined. The hurt no longer controls your narrative, your growth does. Not asking for closure is one of the hardest but most empowering shifts you can make after being hurt. When pain is unresolved, the mind craves explanations. You want clarity, accountability, and a final conversation that neatly ties everything together. Closure feels like the missing piece that will allow you to move on. But when you depend on the person who hurt you to provide that closure, you give them control over your healing. You place your peace in their hands, aiding for words they may never offer or may offer too late. The idea that closure must come from another person is deeply ingrained, but it is also misleading. Many people never receive honest explanations, sincere apologies, or emotional accountability. Some people deny, deflect, or minimize what they did. Others disappear entirely. If your healing depends on their participation, you remain emotionally stuck. Creating your own closure breaks this dependence and allows you to move forward regardless of their actions. Asking for closure often keeps you emotionally tethered to the past. Each attempt to talk, explain, or understand reopens the wound. You replay events, analyze tone, and search for meaning in every word. This mental loop can be exhausting and painful. Creating closure means stepping out of that loop. It means accepting that you may never fully understand why someone hurt you and choosing peace over complete answers. Self-created closure begins with accepting reality as it is, not as you wish it were. This acceptance does not mean approval or forgiveness. It means acknowledging what happened without bargaining with it. You recognize the hurt, the impact it had on you, and the fact that the other person may not meet your emotional needs in this moment or ever. This acceptance is the foundation of emotional freedom. When you stop asking for closure, you stop seeking validation for your pain. You no longer need the other person to confirm that what happened mattered. You trust your own experience. This self-validation is powerful because it strengthens your emotional independence. You learn that your feelings are real and significant, even if the person who caused them refuses to acknowledge them. Creating closure also involves making a clear internal decision. You decide what the situation means for you and how it fits into your life story. Instead of waiting for an explanation, you define the lesson. You ask yourself what this experience taught you about boundaries, communication, or self-respect. This reframing transforms pain into insight and gives the experience purpose beyond suffering. There is also a sense of dignity in not asking for closure. Repeatedly seeking answers from someone who hurt you can slowly erode your self-respect. It can make you feel small, needy, or dismissed. Creating your own closure preserves your dignity. It allows you to walk away knowing you did not beg for understanding or compromise your worth for explanations. Not asking for closure also limits the opportunity for further harm. Conversations meant to provide closure often turn into arguments, defensiveness, or emotional manipulation. The person may say things that invalidate your feelings or shift blame onto you. By choosing to create closure internally, you protect yourself from additional emotional wounds that delay healing. Self-created. Closure often involves grieving not just the hurt, but the expectations you had. You grieve the version of the relationship you hoped for, the person you thought he was, and the future you imagined. This grief is necessary and healthy. Avoiding it by chasing closure only prolongs the pain. Facing it allows you to process the loss fully and move forward with clarity. Creating closure also requires setting mental boundaries. You consciously limit how much time you spend replaying the situation in your mind. When thoughts arise, you gently redirect them. This is not denial, it is discipline. You teach your mind that while the experience mattered, it no longer controls your present moment. Over time, this mental boundary reduces emotional intensity. There is empowerment in realizing that closure is a choice, not an event. You do not need a final conversation, a detailed explanation, or an apology to move on. You need a decision. You decide that the chapter has ended, even if the ending feels incomplete. This decision is an act of self-leadership and emotional maturity. Creating closure also aligns with self-compassion. Instead of pushing yourself to get over it quickly, you allow yourself to heal at your own pace without external pressure. You acknowledge the pain while refusing to stay trapped in it. This balance between compassion and strength is essential for long-term emotional health. When you create closure, you reclaim control over your narrative. The story no longer hinges on his perspective or intentions. It centers on your experience, your growth, and your resilience. This shift changes how you remember the situation. It becomes a chapter that shaped you, not a question mark that haunts you. Self-created closure often brings unexpected calm. Without the constant hope for answers, your mind settles. You stop checking for messages, replaying conversations, or imagining different outcomes. This calm is not indifference, it is acceptance. It signals that your nervous system is beginning to feel safe again. Over time, not asking for closure strengthens your trust in yourself. You realize that you can survive emotional pain without external reassurance. This trust becomes a foundation for future relationships. You enter new connections with clearer boundaries and a deeper understanding of your emotional needs. Choosing to create closure is ultimately a declaration that your healing matters more than unfinished conversations. It is a quiet but powerful choice to move forward with intention, clarity, and self-respect, even when answers are incomplete or absent. Letting your absence speak begins with understanding how much of why our presence you gave when things were good. Your time, your emotional availability, your care, and your consistency likely became a steady part of his life. When someone gets used to that level of presence, they often stop recognizing its value. Absence is powerful precisely because it contrasts with what once existed. When you step back, the space you leave behind becomes noticeable. It forces awareness in a way words never could, because it removes comfort rather than demanding accountability. Absence is not about disappearing dramatically or making announcements. It is quiet, intentional, and grounded in self-respect. You do not need to explain why you are less available or justify your distance. The lack of explanation is part of what gives absence its weight. When you are no longer there in the ways he expects, the silence becomes a mirror. It reflects his actions back to him without accusation or argument. He is left to sit with the consequences rather than your emotions. When you choose absence, you also interrupt the emotional loop that keeps you stuck. Constant interaction after being hurt often keeps pain alive. Every message, every interaction reopens the wound. Absence gives your nervous system space to settle. It allows your emotions to breathe and your thoughts to slow down. In that space, clarity begins to replace confusion. You start to see the situation more objectively, without the constant influence of his presence or reactions. Absence shifts the power dynamic because it removes predictability. When you were always present, he knew where you stood. He knew how to reach you, how you might respond, and how much access he had to your emotional world. When that access disappears, uncertainty takes its place. This uncertainty often triggers reflection. He may begin to replay interactions, question his assumptions, or recognize the impact of his behavior. This process happens internally without you having to say a word. Letting your absence speak also protects your dignity. When someone hurts you, continuing to show up as if nothing changed can feel like a betrayal of yourself. Absence honors the fact that something did change. It acknowledges that your trust was affected and that access to you is no longer automatic. This is not punishment, it is alignment. Your actions begin to match your internal reality, and that alignment strengthens your self-respect. Absence allows you to redirect energy back to yourself. Instead of monitoring his behavior or waiting for signs of remorse, you invest in your own life. You return to routines, goals, and relationships that nourish you. This redirection is not avoidance, it is restoration. As your life fills with purpose and structure, the emotional weight of the situation begins to lessen. You become less defined by what happened and more grounded in who you are. There is also an important emotional boundary created through absence. It limits opportunities for manipulation, mixed signals, or emotional confusion. Without constant contact, there is less room for false hope or half-hearted gestures that keep you emotionally attached without real change. Absence simplifies the situation. It removes noise and reveals truth. What remains is either genuine effort or silence, both of which provide clarity. Letting your absence speak does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop sacrificing your peace to prove that you care. You acknowledge that caring deeply does not require constant availability. In fact, stepping back can be an act of care for yourself. It recognizes that your emotional health matters just as much as the connection you once shared. Absence also reshapes how you are perceived. When you are always present, your presence can be overlooked. When you are absent, your absence is felt. It highlights what you brought into his life: support, warmth, consistency, without you having to list or defend it. This realization, when it comes, is organic and unavoidable because it arises from lived experience rather than conversation. As time passes, absence often brings emotional balance. The intensity of hurt begins to soften, not because it was insignificant, but because you allowed yourself space to heal. You gain perspective on what you want and what you will no longer tolerate. This balance helps you approach future interactions, if they occur at all, from a place of strength rather than longing. Letting your absence speak also takes you patience. Healing does not happen instantly, and absence is not a quick fix. It is a process of allowing time to do its work. During this time, you learn to sit with discomfort without rushing to fill it. This patience builds emotional resilience and reinforces your ability to stand alone without feeling empty. Ultimately, absence becomes a form of communication that does not rely on explanation or persuasion. It communicates boundaries, self-respect, and emotional maturity. It allows actions to replace words and space to replace arguments. In that space, truth emerges naturally, and you regain control over your emotional world without having to demand it. When a man hurts you, remember that your greatest strength is not found in confrontation, explanation, or emotional reaction. It is found in how you choose yourself afterward. By stepping back, growing forward, and protecting your peace, you shift the power quietly but completely. You do not need to prove your worth or explain your pain to be understood. The moment you stop reacting and start responding with self-respect, everything changes. Not just how he sees you, but how you see yourself.